I returned home after burying my husband, my heart heavy with grief and loneliness. As I approached our house, now just my house, I froze in my tracks, a chill running down my spine. The front door was wide open, swinging gently in the evening breeze. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Peering into the darkness, my eyes adjusted to reveal a shadowy figure rummaging through our belongings. I felt a wave of anger surge through me, mixing with the fear that had paralyzed me moments before. How dare someone violate my home on this day of all days? I stood there, torn between fleeing and confronting this intruder, wondering what my dear departed husband would have done in this situation.
Less than 10 months after they met, Joseph took Brittany to a cozy little restaurant. From there, they could see a bridge connecting two towns. After dinner, Joseph reached across the table to take Brittany's hand. Looking into her eyes, he began to speak. "Brittany, from the moment I met you, my life changed in ways I never could have imagined. You've brought me love, joy, and a happiness I thought I'd never find in my lifetime. Every day with you is a new adventure," he said, his voice filled with emotion. He paused for a breath, then continued, "I can't imagine life without you. Brittany, would you make me the happiest man in the world and marry me?" Tears glistened in Brittany's eyes as she caught her breath, struggling to find words. "Of course, Joseph. There's nothing I want more than to spend my life with you," she finally managed to say. After the wedding, Brittany and Joseph's life seemed like a fairy tale. Their days were filled with happiness and dreams of a wonderful future together.
As the days passed, I began to notice tiny cracks in the perfect image of our life together. One quiet evening, Joseph and I were sitting on the sofa, flipping through my old photo albums. We were laughing and sharing memories, the atmosphere light and carefree. But curiosity got the better of me, and I turned to Joseph, eager to know more about the man I loved. I asked him if he had any old photos or childhood stories to share, thinking surely he must have some interesting or special memories. Joseph, who had been relaxed and smiling up until that moment, suddenly tensed up and averted his eyes. He mumbled something about his family not taking many photos and not having any particularly interesting memories. His reaction was subtle, but it planted a small seed of doubt in my mind. I couldn't help but wonder why he always seemed to dodge the subject when it came to his past. Was there something he was hiding from me? On another day, while we were planning a small trip, I tried to broach the subject again. I reminded Joseph that he had mentioned traveling to various places before we met, and I asked him where he had been. His response was visibly uncomfortable and vague, saying it was just here and there, and nothing interesting. He deflected, saying what mattered was where we would go together in the future. His evasive answer only fueled my irritation and deepened my suspicions. Why was he so secretive about his life before we met? I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he didn't want me to know. Every time I tried to learn about his past, he would change the subject, and it was starting to make me anxious. My suspicions grew even stronger when, during a casual conversation with friends, someone asked about Joseph's childhood. Quick as a flash, Joseph changed the subject, cracking a joke to divert attention. Later, when we were alone, I confronted him about it. I told him how his constant evasion of questions about his past was making me uneasy, and I asked point-blank if there was something he didn't want me to know. Joseph looked at me, his expression a mix of sadness and regret. He tried to reassure me, saying he just wanted to focus on our life together now, and that the past was in the past. He insisted he wasn't trying to hide anything from me. I wanted to understand, I really did, but I couldn't shake the feeling that our love was built on an incomplete foundation. I loved Joseph deeply, but how could we build a future together if he wouldn't share his past with me? The situation came to a head one day when I was organizing some papers and stumbled upon a box filled with old photos and letters I'd never seen before. Just then, Joseph walked into the room and saw me holding the box. His expression changed instantly, and I could see the panic in his eyes. I asked him, my voice trembling with a mix of emotions, why he had never shown me these things before. Joseph's response was cold and dismissive. He snatched the box from my hands, saying it was just old junk and telling me to forget about it. As I watched him hurry away with the box, I couldn't help but wonder what on earth he was hiding. This doubt was starting to eat away at the trust between us, and our time together became tense and filled with unspoken frustrations. Things took a turn for the worse one night when our house was broken into. After checking around and finding nothing had been stolen, I felt relieved for a moment, but then a wave of anxiety washed over me. What if they came back? My heart was pounding with fear, and I suddenly felt unsure if I was really safe in our home anymore. I called out to Joseph, my voice shaking, saying we should call the police. His response was firm and left no room for argument, insisting he'd handle it himself. His reaction rattled me to my core, and I felt more isolated than ever. These incidents were making me question everything I thought I knew about Joseph. One night, while Joseph was fast asleep, I couldn't resist the urge to search for answers. I found myself rummaging through that mysterious box again. What I discovered sent chills down my spine, unfamiliar addresses, and names I'd never heard Joseph mention. My heart raced with a mix of fear and betrayal. In the darkness of our bedroom, I whispered, "Joseph, who are you, really?" The pain of uncertainty cut deep into my soul. It was a quiet Friday evening when Joseph and I returned home after dinner. We'd been laughing and chatting about our day, but as we approached the house, a sense of foreboding washed over me. My worst fears were confirmed the moment we opened the door. Our home had been ransacked, drawers flung open, and our belongings scattered across the floor. My voice trembled with a mixture of anger and fear as I cried out, "Again? Joseph. This is the second time. I can't continue living like this anymore." Joseph looked around, barely concealing his irritation. He grudgingly acknowledged the situation but questioned whether calling the police would actually solve anything. I stood my ground, insisting this was the last straw. 2 break-ins were too many, we couldn't just sit by and do nothing anymore. Despite Joseph's obvious hesitation, I reached for the phone and called the police. As we waited for them to arrive, a heavy silence fell between us. The air was thick with unresolved tension and unspoken worries. Joseph was clearly uneasy, seeming anxious about my decision to involve the police. He muttered something about the police only complicating matters, insisting he could have handled it more discreetly. But I'd reached my breaking point. I told Joseph I couldn't live in constant fear, always worrying something might happen every time we left the house. We needed to trust the police to find a real solution. 2 break-ins weren't normal, and I was determined to get to the bottom of it. When the police arrived, I gave them a detailed account of the break-ins and expressed my growing anxiety. They listened attentively, took notes, and promised a thorough investigation. Joseph stood by, unusually quiet, exchanging worried glances with me. After the police left, I turned to Joseph, demanding straight answers. I asked him point blank if he was hiding something from me, something related to these break-ins. Joseph couldn't meet my eyes, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions. He claimed he didn't know anything but promised he'd find a way to resolve the situation. That night, as I tried to rest amidst the chaos and fear, my mind was racing. Why were we being targeted? And why had Joseph been so against calling the police? I could feel my trust in the man I lived with slowly eroding. My decision to call the police, despite Joseph's objections, felt like a turning point. I realized it might be time to face the truth, no matter how frightening it might be. I knew ignoring the problem wouldn't make it disappear. Our safety was at stake, and I couldn't just sit back and wait anymore. My doubts about Joseph's past and these recurring break-ins were robbing me of sleep, forcing me to consider my next move carefully. A few days after the incident, a police officer visited our home with a preliminary report. His expression was serious, and I could tell there was no good news to be shared. Joseph and I greeted him in the living room, tension hanging thick between us. The officer looked us both in the eye and began by saying they hadn't reached any definitive conclusions yet. My heart sank as he explained that the analysis hadn't turned up any fingerprints or other decisive evidence. The fact that nothing had been stolen, just rummaged through, made it difficult to determine the intruder's intent. I watched as Joseph, maintaining his composure, asked what we should do next and if there were any precautions we could take. The officer sighed, and I braced myself for his response. He recommended strengthening our home security, installing alarm systems, surveillance cameras, and possibly changing some locks. As he spoke, I felt a wave of disappointment and fear wash over me. I couldn't help but ask, so, we're basically on our own here? The thought of having no answers and inadequate protection made my stomach churn. With a trembling voice, I ventured another question, wondering if it could be someone we knew. The officer paused, considering his words carefully before answering that they were exploring all possibilities. He urged us to share any details we could remember, no matter how trivial they might seem. After the police left, the atmosphere in our home grew even more tense. The weight of fear, frustration, and uncertainty from the inconclusive investigation bore down on us. As I mulled over the officer's words, I noticed Joseph squirming on the sofa, clutching his chest. Worry immediately gripped me, and I rushed to his side, asking if he was okay. Joseph tried to respond, but all that came out was a raspy whisper. I could see he was struggling to breathe and in pain. He managed to gasp out that he couldn't breathe, and terror seized me. Without hesitation, I helped him up, supporting him with one arm while grabbing the car keys with my free hand. I told him we were going to the hospital right away, trying to keep my voice steady as I assured him I was there for him. On the way to the hospital, I gripped the steering wheel with one hand and held Joseph's hand tightly with the other. He sat beside me, pale and gasping for air. With each labored breath he took, a wave of fear washed over me, and I dreaded the worst. I found myself praying silently as I pressed down on the accelerator. I arrived at the hospital, practically carrying Joseph inside, crying out for help. The emergency team rushed over, whisking Joseph away on a stretcher to the emergency area. Tears streaming down my face, I begged them to save him, chasing after them until I was stopped at the entrance to the ER. Sitting in the waiting room, I was overwhelmed by a sense of helplessness, fear and anxiety, consuming my heart. It might be my fault, I thought, recalling our recent situation. I kept questioning myself, what if we'd been more careful? What if I'd insisted on talking things through more? I couldn't shake the feeling that something could have been different. After what felt like an eternity, a doctor approached me, his calm demeanor offering a glimmer of hope. He explained that Joseph had suffered a severe panic attack brought on by extreme stress, but was now stable and wanting to see me. My voice trembling with worry, I asked if Joseph would be okay, and if these attacks might recur. The doctor, his voice filled with empathy and understanding, told me Joseph needed rest and likely psychological follow-up to manage stress. He assured me that with proper treatment and therapy, panic attacks often improve, and medication could be prescribed if necessary. I nodded, absorbing his words as he emphasized the importance of identifying and eliminating stressors in our lives. I confessed about the stressful situation we'd been in recently, with our home being broken into 2 times. As I said this, I felt a lump of heavy emotion in my throat. The doctor acknowledged the significant stress such a situation would cause and suggested that both Joseph and I might benefit from talking to a professional. He explained how sharing our concerns with a trusted expert could dramatically improve symptoms like Joseph's. As we stopped outside Joseph's room, I felt a wave of helplessness wash over me when I entered and saw him sleeping. Joseph looked so weak and fragile lying there. I felt like I was sinking into a sea of anxiety and fear, the contrast between Joseph's quiet breathing and the storm in my heart becoming increasingly stark. I sat by his bed, my hands shaking as I tried to calm my racing thoughts. The question, "How are we going to get through this?" echoed in my mind, unleashing a flood of worries. Joseph's panic attack wasn't just a warning bell, it was a cry for help, and I felt powerless to protect him from the shadows of his past. The repeated break-ins only amplified my fear. What if next time it's not just this? What if they come while we're home? These thoughts terrified me, making my heart race and my breathing shallow. The anxiety in what should have been our safe haven paralyzed me with fear. And then there was the lingering mystery of Joseph's past, that box he refused to open. I sat there, my mind racing with questions about the break-ins and Joseph's panic attacks. I couldn't shake the feeling that the answers were hidden in that mysterious box he always kept out of sight. "Oh, Joseph," I whispered, my heart heavy with uncertainty, "what are you hiding from me? Why is it all coming to haunt us now?" I wanted to scream these questions, to demand answers, but the fear of what those answers might reveal kept me silent, like a lump in my throat I couldn't swallow. I knew we needed to do something to change our situation, but I felt lost, like a ship without a compass in a stormy sea. "We're caught in this cycle of fear and uncertainty," I admitted to myself, feeling a wave of despair wash over me. My hands grew cold, and my heart felt like it was made of lead. I gently stroked Joseph's hand, seeking some comfort in the familiar touch of his skin. But reality was harsh, unyielding like the winter wind that used to rattle the windows of my childhood home. "We have to face our fears," I thought, trying to summon courage from somewhere deep inside me. "We need to uncover the truth behind all this." The night at the hospital stretched on endlessly, each hour feeling like a lifetime. Exhausted from the emotional storm raging inside me, I finally drifted off to sleep in the chair beside Joseph's bed. Even in sleep, I couldn't escape the anxiety that had become my constant companion. Joseph's panic attack wasn't just a medical episode. It was a warning sign, like a crack in a dam about to burst. All the pressure and fear he'd been holding back had finally spilled over, threatening not just his mental health, but the delicate balance of our relationship. As I dozed fitfully, I couldn't help but wonder what secrets lay buried in Joseph's past, and how they would change our future.
While Brittany slept, Joseph regained consciousness and pondered the gravity of his situation. His mind was in turmoil, filled with relentless thoughts and worries. The idea of revealing his past to Brittany and opening that long-closed door flashed through his mind, but quickly vanished. "I can't do that," he thought to himself, "I can't drag her into my past." The decision to keep his past hidden wasn't an easy one, but to Joseph, it was the only way to protect Brittany from pain and complicated issues. Joseph knew that dealing with the break-ins alone was already a heavy burden for both of them. Adding the weight of his past secrets would only deepen the abyss of fear and uncertainty, he felt. There was a growing sense between them that they needed to find a way to overcome this difficulty together. Joseph, while aware that hiding the truth was jeopardizing the trust they had built, convinced himself that he had to keep it concealed. Joseph's dilemma was further exacerbated by his anxiety about his own mental health. The thought of how to protect Brittany from the shadows of his past without confronting them himself felt like walking a tightrope. He continued to question himself without finding answers. However, As the first light of morning began to stream into the room, illuminating Brittany's peaceful face, Joseph's resolve solidified. He vowed in his heart to protect Brittany, no matter what. Even if it meant bearing the burden of his past alone. "I'll find a solution, no matter what," he promised himself. At that moment, nurses entered the room to draw Joseph's blood for tests.
I jolted awake, my heart racing as if I'd been startled from a nightmare. The sight of nurses bustling around Joseph's bed sent a wave of worry crashing over me. My voice trembled as I asked why they were drawing blood so early, unable to mask the anxiety that had taken root in my chest. The nurse's reassuring smile did little to calm my nerves as she explained it was just routine, additional tests to ensure Joseph's health. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it, something they weren't telling us. Joseph, still groggy from sleep, tried to smile at me, but I could see the fear lurking in his eyes. He told me it was just to be thorough, but his words rang hollow, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. When they mentioned needing X-rays, my stomach twisted into knots. I walked with Joseph to the X-ray room, the silence between us as heavy as lead. I wanted to bombard them with questions and demand answers, but the words caught in my throat. What if I didn't want to hear the truth? The thought that they might be hiding something from us burrowed deep into my mind, refusing to let go. I could see the same fear reflected in Joseph's eyes, despite his attempts to appear grateful for the doctor's care. As they prepared him for the X-ray, Joseph tried to reassure me, but his voice betrayed the tension he was feeling. I stood there, feeling helpless and afraid, memories of my parents' illnesses flooding back. The sterile hospital smell, the beeping machines, it all felt too familiar, too foreboding. I wanted to reach out and hold Joseph's hand, to feel the warmth of his skin and know that everything would be okay. But as I watched him being wheeled away, I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives were about to change forever. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and silently prayed for strength to face whatever was coming, strength to be there for Joseph, no matter what. As we returned to the hospital room after Joseph's X-ray, the silence between us was deafening. I couldn't bear it any longer and finally voiced my concerns, asking why we hadn't been given any explanation about these tests. Joseph nodded, his face a mix of frustration and worry that mirrored my own. He tried to reassure me, saying we'd get through this together and that we should trust the doctors were doing their best. But his words felt hollow, like a band-aid on a gaping wound. Back in the room, we both retreated into our thoughts, the tension palpable. I broke the silence again, my voice barely above a whisper as I reminded Joseph about the doctor's initial diagnosis of a panic attack. The fear I'd been trying to suppress bubbled up as I admitted my worry that all these additional tests might mean something more serious. Joseph looked at me, his eyes reflecting my anguish, and confessed he was worried too. This was uncharted territory for us, and the uncertainty was suffocating. I clasped his hand tightly, seeking comfort and offering it simultaneously, like we'd done so many times over our years together. But the next few hours brought more terror than solace. Joseph's condition suddenly deteriorated, his breathing becoming labored and erratic. My heart raced as I frantically pushed the emergency button, watching helplessly as he struggled for air. I cried out for help, my voice cracking with panic. The room quickly filled with nurses and doctors, their calm efficiency a stark contrast to my rising hysteria. One nurse tried to reassure me, but her words were drowned out by the chaos in my mind. I pleaded for information, for reassurance, for anything to cling to in this storm of fear. But I was gently ushered out of the room, the last thing I heard being a doctor calling for a defibrillator. Standing in the hallway, I felt like I was watching a movie in slow motion, unable to process what was happening. The nurse's firm but sympathetic voice telling me to wait outside barely registered. In that moment, all I could think was how quickly life can change, how fragile our plans and dreams really are. I'd seen friends go through similar ordeals with their spouses, but I never imagined I'd be standing here, praying for my husband's life. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly before me, each second an eternity as I waited for news. The sounds of the medical team rushing around Joseph and preparing the defibrillator echoed in my ears. I whispered a desperate prayer, begging God not to take him from me. When the doctors finally stabilized Joseph, I was hit with a wave of conflicting emotions, relief tangled with despair. I approached his bed, now quiet from the sedatives, and clasped his hand, my voice choked with tears as I wondered aloud how I could possibly go on without him. I held on tight, as if my touch alone could keep him tethered to this world. As I sat by Joseph's bedside, watching his unsteady sleep, a nurse entered with a serious expression. I stood up immediately, my heart pounding as I waited for news. The nurse suggested we talk outside to avoid disturbing Joseph, and I nodded, following her into the hallway. My voice trembled with worry as I asked what had happened to him. She explained calmly that Joseph's oxygen levels were low, and they needed to start oxygen therapy with a nasal cannula to help stabilize his condition. I felt a heavy weight in the pit of my stomach, fear washing over me anew. I needed reassurance, asking if he would really be okay. The fact that Joseph needed oxygen brought a fresh wave of terror. The nurse tried to comfort me, saying it was a common and effective treatment, and they would monitor him closely. I tried to accept her words, nodding silently. I asked if I could stay with him during the oxygen therapy, desperate to feel useful, to contribute to his recovery even if only by being present. The nurse smiled gently, assuring me that my presence might be comforting for Joseph. But as time passed, Joseph's condition only worsened. By the 5th day of his hospitalization, he had grown weaker and thinner, a shadow of the vibrant man I loved. Despite the medical team's best efforts, they still couldn't provide a definitive diagnosis, and I was reaching my physical and emotional limits. I stayed by Joseph's bedside, holding his hand, talking to him even when he was unconscious, waiting for any sign of improvement. But no improvement came, and his lack of response only heightened my fear and frustration. I found myself whispering, not to Joseph, but to myself, wondering what on earth was happening. It was like being in a nightmare. Each day that passed without answers felt like a year, reminding me of how quickly life can change, how fragile our plans for the future really are. I thought of all the things we still wanted to do together, the trips we'd planned, the grandchildren we hoped to see, and felt a deep ache in my chest. The hospital room became my whole world, the beeping of machines and the smell of antiseptic a constant reminder of our new reality. I longed for the simple moments we used to share, morning coffee, evening walks, quiet conversations, now seeming like distant memories. Yet, even in despair, I clung to hope and resolved to be strong for Joseph, just as he had always been strong for me. There were rare moments when Joseph regained consciousness, and I tried to hide my pain and worry. I told him that the doctors were doing their best, and that he should stay strong and focus on recovery. But even as I tried to sound optimistic, the heavy reality of possibly losing my love weighed on my heart. Joseph was too weak to respond verbally, but he squeezed my hand tightly and his eyes conveyed gratitude and love. Despite his weakened state, it was a moment of quiet yet profound communication, reaffirming the strong bond we shared. In meetings with the medical team, I desperately sought answers, trying to understand why Joseph wasn't responding to treatment. My voice was filled with despair and choked with tears as I begged them not to give up, insisting there must be something more they could do. But their answers were always cautious, offering medical explanations of possibilities without much certainty. As the fatigue and emotional strain of hospital days piled up, my cell phone vibrated, breaking the silence. It was our neighbor, Daniel, calling with alarming news that our house door had been forced open and left ajar. I thanked him, promising to check it out immediately, while a mix of fear and irritation washed over me. I couldn't believe this was happening while Joseph was in such a state. I told the semi-conscious Joseph that I loved him and needed to take care of something, promising to return soon. Those words were as much to calm myself as they were for him. As I drove home, I struggled to contain the whirlwind of emotions inside me. Worst-case scenarios flashed through my mind, from violent break-ins to the possibility that someone had set something up to harm Joseph or me. The thought that this might be some kind of warning sent chills down my spine. I wondered if the intruder knew we weren't home. As I approached the house and saw the open door, my fear turned to helpless anger. I was exhausted from sleepless nights at the hospital, constant worry about Joseph's condition, and now this repeated intrusion into our home. Entering the house and seeing everything apparently untouched, my frustration peaked. I searched every room, looking for clues or reasons for the intrusion, wondering what on earth was going on. It felt like life was piling on, one crisis after another, just when I thought I couldn't handle anymore. I remembered how Joseph and I had always faced challenges together, and now, when I needed him most, he wasn't here. The silence of the house was deafening, so different from the constant beeping and bustle of the hospital. I longed for the days when our biggest worry was what to have for dinner or where to go on our next vacation. Standing in our burglarized home, while Joseph fought for his life in the hospital, I felt the most alone I had ever been in all our time together. But I knew I had to be strong, for Joseph and for us. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and started to methodically check the house, just as Joseph would have done. We'd weathered storms before, I told myself, and we'd weather this one too, somehow. The lack of disturbance didn't bring me any relief, instead it intensified my feeling of being watched and threatened. What were these intruders after? Why were they doing this? As I closed the door, the reality of everything that had happened hit me all at once. Realizing I was alone, unseen and unheard, I finally allowed myself to drop the mask of strength and composure I'd been wearing. Why? I cried out, my voice echoing off the empty walls of our home. It wasn't just a question, but an outpouring of pain, frustration, and anger at the merciless situation Joseph and I found ourselves in. I can't take it anymore. I screamed, grabbing a vase from the table and hurling it against the wall. As I watched it shatter into pieces, I felt as if my heart was breaking in the same way. I can't do this, I sobbed, sinking to my knees among the fragments, my chest tight with a toxic mix of pain and hatred. My face was wet with tears, my sobs a testament to how exhausted I was from fighting an invisible enemy. As I wept in despair, my phone suddenly rang, breaking the silence that had enveloped my pain. I answered with a voice trembling with fear. On the other end, I heard a voice that was calm but urgent, telling me to return to the hospital immediately as Joseph's condition had suddenly worsened. In that moment, my heart froze, feeling as if my worst fears were becoming reality. I cried out, asking what had happened, if he was okay, as I frantically searched for my keys, terror growing inside me. They just told me to hurry, that they'd explain at the hospital. When I arrived, a nurse met me and led me to a private room. Before she even spoke, I knew the gravity of the situation. She told me Joseph had suffered another cardiac arrest, and X-rays had revealed a blockage in his lungs. She didn't need to finish her sentence. I felt as if the ground had fallen away beneath me. "No, it can't be," I whispered, tears already streaming down my face. "He can't leave me," I thought, the reality of losing him hitting me like a physical blow. In the days that followed, as I prepared for Joseph's funeral, I found myself talking to him. I asked him how I was supposed to live without him, reminded him of our promise to be together always. As I chose the music for the service, each note seemed to underscore the permanence of his absence. Memories flooded my mind, our first meeting at that little cafe, his proposal at our favorite restaurant, the sound of his distinctive laugh. After the funeral, I returned home, my heart heavy with an overwhelming sadness. The house felt empty, every corner a reminder of the life we'd shared and the future we'd planned. I sat in his favorite chair, running my hand over the worn armrest where his hand had rested so many times. The silence was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the mantel, a sound that now seemed to mock me with its steady rhythm, a reminder that time was moving on without Joseph. I looked at our wedding photo on the wall, remembering how young and full of hope we'd been. We've overcome so much together, the joy of building our careers, the heartache of not being able to have children, the pride of watching each other grow and change. I was alone, drifting in an ocean of sadness. I picked up the blanket he always used when watching TV and held it close, breathing in the faint scent of him that still lingered. "Oh, Joseph," I whispered, "how am I supposed to do this without you?" Joseph's absence left an all-consuming emptiness, and every step towards our shared home cruelly reminded me of his loss. As I approached the house, however, I noticed something unsettling. The door was slightly ajar, just like before, and a sense of déjà vu mixed with fresh fear washed over me. Not again, I thought, dreading another intrusion. Without Joseph, I felt utterly powerless in the face of this recurring nightmare. I cautiously pushed the door open, my heart pounding erratically in my chest. "Is anyone there?" I called out, my voice echoing through the quiet house. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I was completely taken aback by what I saw. There, standing in the hallway, was a young girl. She wasn't a malicious intruder, but a child with large eyes staring right at me. I was startled but managed to suppress a scream. Instead, I approached slowly, trying not to appear threatening. I gently asked if she was lost, introducing myself as Brittany. I extended my hand but kept a respectful distance, not wanting to frighten her. The girl attempted to flee out of fear, but my desperate plea stopped her in her tracks. "Wait," I said, my voice a mix of desperation and pleading. I gasped as I looked at the girl standing in the middle of the living room, illuminated by a single ray of light from the dim window. She bore an uncanny resemblance to Joseph. Her shoulder-length hair had the same distinctive wave, her skin was the same bronze that reflected Joseph's proud heritage, and her vivid blue eyes were a mirror image of his. "Are you lost?" I asked again, my voice trembling with emotion and surprise. The girl before me looked like a young, feminine version of Joseph, and it took my breath away. After a moment of hesitation, the girl finally spoke. She said she was looking for this person, holding out a photo of Joseph. In that instant, I was shocked, a complex mix of emotions crossing my face. I asked for her name, and in a low, shaky voice, she replied that it was Abigail. I invited Abigail to sit and talk, gesturing in a way that showed both my desire to welcome her and my need to understand this situation better. I motioned towards the sofa, settling down beside her. The initial tension slowly dissolved, replaced by a cautious but open atmosphere. My mind was reeling, trying to process this unexpected turn of events. Suddenly, I found myself face to face with a young girl who looked exactly like my late husband. It was like seeing a ghost, or a piece of Joseph that had somehow survived. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever revelations might come. After all the months spent with Joseph, I thought I knew everything about him. But life, it seemed, had one more surprise in store for me. I hesitated for a moment, my heart racing as I looked at this young girl who bore such a striking resemblance to Joseph. My voice trembled as I asked, "How did you come to know him?" I was desperate to understand the connection between Joseph and this child, feeling that I was on the brink of uncovering a secret I'd never known existed. In that moment, it hit me like a bolt of lightning. This girl was part of Joseph's life, a part he had kept hidden from me. The physical similarities were undeniable, but what really convinced me was the emotional connection I felt to her. I watched as she struggled with her words, her expression a mix of uncertainty and determination. Finally, in a voice that was soft yet strong, she said, "He's my father." I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet, my mind reeling with countless questions. What do you mean? Joseph had a daughter? Why didn't he ever tell me? I choked out, tears spilling down my cheeks. I was trying to process her words, my heart aching with the loss of Joseph and the shock of this new revelation. The girl, Abigail, looked at me with those startlingly blue eyes, so much like Joseph's, and began to explain. She told me she was 13 and had been coming to the house, searching for her father, but never finding him. Her voice quivered as she apologized for entering our home without permission. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders as I realized the cause of our recent break-ins, but it was quickly replaced by a new heaviness. "There's no need to apologize, Abigail," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm relieved to know it was you and not some stranger, but I'm sad we didn't meet sooner." I was still trying to wrap my head around the fact that Joseph had a daughter, feeling a mix of joy and sorrow that a part of him was still alive and standing right in front of me. Abigail continued, her voice thick with recent pain, telling me that her mother had passed away not long ago. My heart clenched, and I felt a rush of empathy for this young girl who had lost so much. "Oh, Abigail, I'm so sorry about your mother," I said gently, tears welling up in my eyes. "And I'm afraid I have more sad news. Your father, Joseph, he passed away recently too. I've just come back from his funeral." I watched as the news hit her, feeling helpless in the face of her grief. "I'm so sorry you had to find out this way," I continued, my voice barely above a whisper. "Joseph was a wonderful man, full of love. I'm sure he would have been overjoyed to know about you." Abigail lowered her eyes, trying to control her emotions. In a hoarse whisper, she said, "I wanted to meet him." She went on to explain that her mother had told her about her father shortly before she died, describing what kind of person he was and where she might find him. Her mother had spoken well of Joseph, but it seemed he hadn't known about Abigail. By the time her mother realized she was pregnant, they had already separated and she had moved away. Now, Abigail had nowhere to go. In that moment, I made a decision that would change both our lives. "Abigail," I said, my voice stronger now, "this house is your home too. I'm sure Joseph would have wanted you to be safe and happy. You can stay here as long as you like." I watched as relief and joy spread across Abigail's face, her eyes shining with grateful tears. "Thank you. I'm so grateful," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I feel like I've finally found a place to belong. Ever since Mom died, I've been so scared of not having a home. My grandparents are gone too, and I've been in government care." Suddenly, driven by an instinct I couldn't explain, I stood up from the sofa and walked to the room Joseph and I had shared. There was a box there that I'd always wondered about, one that Joseph had kept closed and hidden beneath other things. With trembling hands, I picked up the box that held Joseph's memories, feeling its weight not just in my arms, but in my heart. As I returned to the living room, I saw Abigail waiting with eyes full of curiosity, a mirror of my own conflicting emotions. Together, we opened the box, and it was like opening a treasure chest of Joseph's past. Our past. There were photographs of Joseph, looking so young and carefree, a stark contrast to the man I had known. Among them, I saw a woman I didn't recognize, and Abigail, her voice quivering with emotion, pointed to her. She told me it was her mother, Sharon. I watched as Abigail's eyes locked onto the photos, searching for clues to her roots, her history. In one picture, I saw a young Abigail, her smile so bright it could light up a room. Abigail's face softened as she recognized herself, a bittersweet moment of connection to a past she never knew. As we continued to explore the contents, we found a carefully folded letter. Abigail took it gently, as if it might crumble in her hands, and read her mother's words aloud. The letter was a plea to Joseph, asking him not to search for them, assuring him they were okay. Sharon promised to tell Abigail about her father when she was older and if she expressed a desire to meet him. The mixture of farewell and hope in that letter left us both speechless, overcome with emotion. We sat there in silence, the weight of the past settling around us like a heavy blanket. Among the photos and letters, we discovered Joseph's journal, its worn cover a testament to the secrets it held. As we turned the pages, we found an entry where Joseph had written about his daughter. His words, scrawled in shaky handwriting, revealed the depth of his emotions. He wrote about the lack of news, hoping it meant they were living well. Joseph's pain was palpable as he expressed his regret for the love and memories he couldn't give his daughter. He desperately wanted her to know how much she was loved, no matter where she was. On another page, we found Joseph's resolution to bury the past. He had decided it was necessary to move forward, to live his life and love those around him while quietly keeping this part of his past locked away. Reading these words, I could almost hear Joseph's voice, tinged with a melancholy acceptance and a quiet strength to overcome the pain. In the box, we also found 3 letters Joseph had written to Sharon, each marked "Return to Sender." These letters were a testament to Joseph's efforts to reconnect with Sharon and his strong desire to maintain a bond with his daughter. It was clear that Joseph had never given up hope of one day being a family again. As Abigail and I held these unread letters, it felt as if Joseph was there with us, his words echoing with familiarity and longing. For Abigail, these letters were a tangible sign of her father's love, proof of his efforts to reach out to her despite the obstacles. For me, these discoveries were like pieces of a puzzle, helping me understand Joseph more deeply. They revealed the depth of his love for his daughter and his determination to fight for her, showing me a side of him I had never known. As the weight of these revelations settled over us, I felt a need for a new beginning. I suggested we make the day special by going shopping for clothes and shoes. It was my attempt to bring a little light back into our hearts, which had been so heavy with recent loss. During our shopping trip, Abigail and I found comfort in each other's company. We laughed as we tried on different outfits, sharing stories and creating new memories. In our shared pain and newfound hope, we were forging a bond that felt unbreakable. As I watched Abigail twirl in a colorful dress, I couldn't help but smile. I told her that Joseph would have been overjoyed to see us together, laughing and smiling. The mention of his name brought a bittersweet feeling, but it also strengthened the sense that he was still with us in some way. It was as if his spirit was still with us, guiding us through this new chapter of our lives. After our shopping trip, we drove to the facility where Abigail had been staying to collect her few belongings. As I watched her say goodbye to that place, I felt a fierce surge of protectiveness, like a mama bear with her cub. I placed my hand on her shoulder and told her she'd never have to come back here again, that she had a home to return to now. On our way home, I broached the subject of adoption, my heart pounding like a drum. I explained that for Joseph's sake, and because I already thought of her as family, I wanted to start the adoption process. I asked her what she thought about it, holding my breath as I waited for her response. Abigail was so overcome with surprise and joy that she was speechless at first. When she finally found her voice, it was thick with emotion as she told me how happy she was. That day, even though grief still hung over us like a heavy fog, Abigail and I found smiles and hope for a new future. The promise of a new family, built on Joseph's love and our care for each other, became a beacon of hope in our lives. I made a silent vow to provide Abigail with a stable, warm home, the kind every child deserves. I started the process of enrolling her in a local school, knowing how important it was for her to be around kids her own age. I wanted her to have the chance to make friends and establish her own routines, to have a sense of normalcy after so much upheaval. At the same time, I made a personal decision to remain single, to honor Joseph's memory. I plan to use this time alone to reflect on my memories with Joseph and to truly come to terms with what he meant in my life. It is a bittersweet decision, like so many we face as we age, but I know it is right for me. I am determined to live with both grief and hope, believing that my love for Joseph would guide both Abigail and me towards a beautiful future. I knew that it wouldn't be easy, but then again, the most worthwhile things in life seldom are.
If you enjoyed this heartwarming tale of love, loss, and new beginnings, we'd be so grateful if you could give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us and keeps us motivated to bring you new stories almost every day. Stay tuned for our next captivating tale, you won't want to miss it. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for your continued support. We look forward to sharing more stories with you soon. Until next time, take care and God bless.